we begin with the verse Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim sheva esrei shana. Yaakov lived in Egypt for 17 years. Now, ironically, Egypt was the worst place in the world, and Yaakov was, because of circumstances, the famine, forced to go and settle in Egypt. One would think that this is the worst place and the last place he wants to be. However, the Zohar says on the words Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim that these 17 years in Egypt were the best years of his life. Literally, this was the good life for Yaakov. And this needs to be understood. How can Yaakov, the holiest person in the world, be comfortable, find his home in Mitzrayim, which is called Ervat Haaretz, the nakedness of the land, the place where they were steeped in Avodah Zarah, idol worship, promiscuity, lying, cheating. It was the worst place in the world to be, yet here we're told that Yaakov has the good life, and we have to understand this seeming contradiction. So the way we can appreciate it is this. Yaakov knows that he's eventually going to leave the world and leave his descendants in Egypt. And he should be afraid that, God forbid, Egypt will affect them in a bad way. So what is it about Yaakov that he can be so happy and live out his years of retirement, so to speak, in this bliss, when he should be screaming inside, afraid of the doom that awaits his descendants? So there are two things that we could say that help him calm down. First of all, we know that Yosef came in front of him, settled in Egypt, and became the ruler of Egypt. Now, seeing Yosef survive this encounter with Egypt and remain righteous and remain holy was certainly a positive thing for Yaakov to see. More than that, Yosef raised his children in Egypt, and they came out also righteous. It is for that reason that we bless the children. When we bless our children, we bless them and say that they should be like Ephraim and Manasseh, the children of Yosef. Because Ephraim and Manasseh were the first two children to grow up in Galut, so to speak, in Mitzrayim, and they were able to come out holy. And that strength to come out holy in Egypt is the blessing we give, because right now in exile we need that type of extra power. The second thing that we can say is why Yaakov can relax and enjoy the last years of his life in Egypt is because before he himself went to Egypt to settle with him and the entire Jewish family at the time, all of his sons and extended grandchildren, was first and foremost he sent Yehuda in front of him, lehorot, to instruct everybody. The rabbis tell us that this instruction was to set up a base medrash where there would be Torah learning and where rabbinic instruction, when guidance and direction would come out from the base medrash. So if a nation is committed to following its Torah scholars, its Jewish leaders, then they are going to follow in a good direction. And so Yaakov prepared this ahead of time, knowing that that was a necessary component for the survival and continuation of the Jewish people. But perhaps the most important element of what was the key to the success of the Jewish people in Egypt and why Yaakov was content that they would survive was the fact that Yosef, in his genius, understood that the only way for the Jewish people to survive in Egypt was if we would seclude them, separate them from the masses. There is, for example, the idea in modern terminology, we talk about living in a suburb. People could work in New York City, but living in New York City is terrible. Imagine a Jewish family trying to thrive in the heart of New York City with everything there. We won't get into the details. So there's the idea of a suburb. And that's exactly what we see here in the Parsha of the Jewish people in Egypt. When the brothers of Yosef come to town, so of course Paro's excited. He took over the world with one Yosef. Now he's told he's got Yosef's brothers, and they're bigger and stronger than Yosef. All I could imagine in Paro's eyes, all he could see are the dollar signs, so to speak, how he's going to take over the world with Yosef and his brothers. But Yosef, understanding that, brings the weakest of the brothers, and he explains to them what to say to Paro. And he tells them to explain that we're shepherds, and that's what we do for generations, and that's our expertise. Now let me try to give you a little bit of an analogy, a little bit of a joke as well, how I interpret this whole dialogue between the brothers and Paro. Imagine in America, you bring to the biggest corporate leader, Donald Trump or whoever, you bring him your brothers, because you're of course $1 million man, you make him millions, and you bring him your brothers, which are supposed to also make him millions. And as soon as they start talking, he asks the brothers, so what do you do? Let me figure out how I can use you to become even more rich and more powerful. And the brothers answer, well, we're garbage men. We're garbage men. My dad is a garbage man. My granddad was a garbage man. We've been garbage men in all our life. We're garbage men. We are garbage experts. So what's going to happen? Obviously, the face on this businessman is going to, smile is going to turn to a frown, because he was imagining how he can make dollars off of these people, and in the end, they're talking about garbage. That's to some degree how we can appreciate the dialogue between the brothers of Yosef and Paro. What exactly happened then was Paro was expecting to see all of these great talents and how he can use them to control the world, and they tell him that they're shepherds. Now, in that time and place, in this modern, civilized Egyptian society, being a shepherd was like being a garbage person. That was what being a shepherd was like. And so when they told him that we're shepherds, our father was shepherds and our grandfather was shepherds, and that's what's in our blood, being a shepherd, they were essentially telling them that you have no use for us. And by being told that you have no use for us, so of course when Joseph comes with the solution, let's send them off into a far off place, Goshen, like the suburb. Let's put them there. Let's get them out of the way, and they won't be an embarrassment to Paro. So Paro's like, great, Yosef, you're a genius. You saved me. Let's get them as far away from the Egyptian society as we can, because they're just going to be an embarrassment for us. And in doing so, Yosef understood, of course, what was happening, and he saved the Jewish people. Because in order for the Jewish people to survive, we have to maintain a level of purity and sanctity and wholesomeness. And if we're in the heart of Manhattan, 48th and Broadway, I think that's pretty action-packed over there. If that's where you're trying to raise your daughter to be a modest woman, and that's where you're trying to raise your son to be devoted to serving Hashem, that's not the place. And so by sending the Jews off to Goshen, which was a place where they would be isolated and they would be able to maintain purity, sanctity, wholesomeness, so the added benefit, which was really what saves the day, is that the divine presence could come and stay with them there. Had they been in Egypt proper, so in all that impurity, who says that they would have been able to connect with Hashem in the same way? And as a matter of fact, we find later on that Moshe Rabbeinu himself had to leave Egypt in order to pray to Hashem, because Egypt was full of all of these bad things. So with this and everything we're saying now, we can appreciate that how does Yaakov live out his golden years, so to speak, in Egypt without being so worried, is because everything was set in place for success. He had the Beis Medrash, he had Jewish leadership, and we had isolation from the influences and the unfortunate negative things that our children would be exposed to. With all that, we can appreciate how Chazal tell us that throughout the generations, the Jews kept their traditions. They kept their Jewish names, they kept their same clothing, and they kept their names. And these are just simple things we're being told, but the depth of keeping their names and keeping their look unique and keeping their language unique meant that they were staying true to the ways of their ancestors. And in that sense, they survived as a people through that exile. Now, of course, history is important, but if history is not being used to teach us about the future, then it's just a history lesson, and that they do in secular schools. Here, when we have a history lesson, understanding how the Jews survived in Egypt, it's really a lesson for us here and now, because how do we survive in this time of exile with all of the exposure we have? Today in our living room, you can have anything you want. You turn on the computer, click a few buttons, and the whole world is there. The greatest test we've ever faced, we perhaps face today. How do we survive? Well, we survive with these same messages. A devotion to traditional values. The Beis Medrash has to be the main thing. Torah and the guidance of our rabbis. We have to stay out of the limelight and the fancy idea of trying to conquer the world, because when you conquer the world, at the end of the day, you get conquered with it. You think that you could be involved and mingle and not get affected and get tarnished. No, you get affected as much as you're affecting. And so we have to know how to maintain a little bit of a secluded type of lifestyle, in that we can maintain our purity and sanctity and hope for children and grandchildren to continue in a way of Torah and mitzvot. The modern approaches, unfortunately, we see the results, and it doesn't have the continuation that we see in the traditional approach. So we're not trying to compare who's better, who's not, but when we're talking about saving our children and seeing our children continue, so we want to not take any chances. And again, anytime you remove these barriers, you just make it more risky and more dangerous for our children to survive. So that's the same way that we survived in Egypt is the same way we're going to survive now and tomorrow.